righting a systemic wrong. That's how some describe two new policies meant to improve equity for kidney transplant patients.
Since the 1990s, a calculation that factored in race and disadvantaged black patients was used to help decide when patients could be put on the transplant wait list. Channel 9's Sabrina Maggiore explains some experts believe thousands have gotten ill or even died as a result.
Transplant policymakers took two major steps. First, they banned the use of race in an important calculation that measures kidney function. Second, they credited patients negatively impacted by that calculation. But some believe it's not enough to make up for decades of what they call medical racism.
5 days a week, this is Eric Price's reality.
So this equipment basically helps me clean my blood daily.
Diagnosed with kidney disease as a child, at 13 he received a kidney transplant. But when that failed a year later, he was back on dialysis.
For 10 years, I was dialyzing 3 times a week. There was a point where I was a freshman in college. I didn't have a car and I lived in Utah. And I was biking at 6 a.m. to get to dialysis and then biking home.
At 24, Price got a second kidney, but 6 years later, it failed too.
So that's kind of how it happened, and just kind of came out of nowhere. After a few months of not feeling good, and then bam, that was it.
It meant Price was back on the transplant list, but with a shocking revelation. Price should have been on the list 6 months earlier. He learned the delay was because of his race.
Did Advent Health, have that race-based factor as part of their calculations?
Just about every hospital in the country has.
Dr. Bobby Nabanapudi is the medical director of abdominal transplant at Advent Health. Since the 1990s, race has been a factor in a formula used by doctors to make critical decisions about patient care. The calculation is known as eGFR. It's used to score a patient's kidney function. But federal policymakers admit the inclusion of race led to, quote, a systemic underestimation of kidney disease among black patients. That's now changed.
So we had to go through our entire wait list of patients, which consisted of over 450 people. And we had to look back in their medical records that we had.
Have any of those patients already gone through and gotten their kidneys faster as a result of this policy?
Yes, they have.
Still, patients like Price wonder how race remained a variable for so long. Labs produced the calculation that included race, physicians across the U.S. referred patients based off it, and transplant programs used it to evaluate whether a transplant was appropriate.
There's been decades going on, people suffering, and nobody thought to change this. I waited a long time for a kidney. I could have been suffering less.
Dr. Nabanapudi says Central Florida's only transplant program now has it right, with the correction applied to every patient.
There's no sunset to, adjusting wait times for any of these people. It's always easy in retrospect to go back and have regrets if you could do it earlier. There's a lot of things that people could change if they could do it earlier. But at least now we have the right way going forward.
According to the federal government, between January and July of 2023, more than 6,000 patients had their wait times adjusted. Advent Health says the average adjustment for their 58 patients was about 3 years. As for Eric Price, he still lives in Utah and is working with transplant doctors there to try and get a new kidney. Reporting in Orlando, I'm Sabrina Maggiore, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
That is incredible reporting. Great report, Sabrina.
Yeah, and hopefully Mr. Price will, get his next kidney and live a long and happy life. A 9 investigation into a racially biased formula that kept thousands of black Americans off the kidney transplant list. Good evening, I'm Greg Warman.
And I'm Martha Sigalski. We first told you about this last month and showed you how hospitals had to dig through records to credit those hurt by this. The government gave hospital systems until January of this year to move people who were disadvantaged up the wait list. In the months since, thousands of patients learned for the first time race played a role in their health care. Channel 9's Sabrina Maggiore has been investigating this, such an important story. Sabrina, you actually spoke to a man who waited years for a transplant, and he told you hundreds likely died waiting for a kidney that just never came.
And Martha, since hospitals were first told to look at this, more than 14,000 black patients across the U.S. were found to have been impacted. But there's no way of knowing how many people before this died because they couldn't get their transplants. Now, one man is hoping there will be consequences.
First diagnosed with kidney disease in 1999, Cleveland Holt has his daughter to thank for the kidney that's keeping him alive today.
My daughter said, well, Dad, why wait? I waited all this time.
In March of this year, Holt had a successful transplant. His 25-year-old daughter donated her kidney after several hospitals made Holt ineligible on their wait list. Doctors said he was too sick for the procedure because of heart issues and other complications stemming from dialysis.
Dialysis is a needed treatment to survive, but it also has severe consequences on your health.
Before his daughter's gift, dialysis helped his failing kidneys filter his blood. And while he was hoping for a potential kidney match, he was unaware of how race was playing a part.
There was letters sent that I have that informed me.
A formula known as EGFR was used to measure his kidney function. Starting in the 1990s, that formula included the patient's race as a factor. According to transplant policymakers, it led to a systemic underestimation of kidney disease severity, and it delayed transplants for thousands of black patients. In Holt's case, he should have been listed for a transplant about 5 years earlier.
It's a lot of time and a lot of damage that can take place.
Holt's now one of at least 3 Americans who has filed a federal lawsuit claiming the race-based formula violated his civil rights and caused him serious damage. As Holt waited for a transplant, he says his health got so bad he needed multiple heart surgeries and was forced into early retirement.
My hat's off to my daughter because she saw it fit for her dad to receive the kidney, and unfortunately when there was persons or systems that did not.
According to the National Kidney Foundation, in 2020, decision makers started looking at eliminating race from the EGFR kidney formula and others across medicine that factored in race.
There was a movement in medicine, a broad movement to get away from race-based calculations.
Dr. Joseph Vasilati says over a dozen of those formulas are now in various stages of revision. But Holt believes the damage to his health is already done. He'll forever live with the consequences of his delayed transplant, and he points to thousands of others who never had that chance.
If they had a chance to get a kidney transplant, they might be still with us.
And the United Network for Organ Sharing sets transplant policy in the U.S. While we did ask them for an interview, they declined because of the pending lawsuits. 9 Investigates will continue to follow this story for you and bring you updates as soon as we get them. But for now in studio, I'm Sabrina Maggiore, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.